45 minutes of non-stop swordplay. Some call it one of the greatest action sequences ever filmed. Others say it drags on forever. Today on Nerd Legion, we dive into 13 Assassins, Takashi Miike's brutal samurai epic that directly inspired the combat and cinematic style of Ghost of Yōtei. Is it a masterpiece of violence and horror, or an overindulgent slog? More importantly, what does it reveal about the samurai code, and why does that matter for Sucker Punch's upcoming game? Stick around as we clash over one of the most ambitious samurai films of the modern era. Hey guys, welcome back to Nerd Legion. This is going to be our second video on the films and anime that inspired the upcoming Ghost of Yōtei video game. And part of the reason we're doing this is because we're going to be doing a review on the last Free Nation Gaming channel of Ghost of Yōtei. So we thought it would be fun to check out a bunch of the content that serves as the basis for this game and also Ghost of Tsushima, obviously, especially because they have modes in the game that are going to complement some of these directors. So today we'll be looking at 13 Assassins from 2010. It is a film directed by Miike, and there is a Miike Mode coming up in Ghost of Yōtei. And what this does is, like the Kurosawa mode we discussed in our last episode on Throne of Blood, is it changes your perspective on the game to be more cinematic in that director style. In this case, Miike's case, it does, in fact, kind of zoom in the camera, increase blood and splatter.
Mud
Blood
splatter.
and
Mud.
So closer to the action, more blood, more mud. Which, if you've now watched 13 Assassins, should make a lot of sense to you. This is a really unique film. If you played Ghost of Tsushima and you've watched this movie, you will understand how similar these things are, and that inspiration will continue more literally and directly because they have gotten approval from Miike to do this in the game, just like they got approval from the Kurosawa estate to do it in the games as well. So it should be an interesting way to play through, but also, in addition to, of course, just the visual differences, there is the strong correlation between the action of 13 Assassins and the action of Ghost of Tsushima and Ghost of Yōtei, and the violence and the samurai themes quite clearly, which is what we're going to be talking about in this episode.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been really interesting checking out a bunch of these movies across the decades and getting ready to play the game. And I'm so happy we're doing this too, because it's I like anything that brings video games and other forms of media together, right? Because in my mind now, you know, television, film, video games, it's all kind of in the same realm at this point. Because when you play a really good single-player game, you're getting that same sort of, you know, journey that you would get from a good novel or something too, right? The only difference is that you're just participating in it a little bit more, you know? But all the themes, the thoughts, it all feels very similar to me now in a good way. So I like that we're kind of combining everything. I've liked everything we've watched so far, including 13 Assassins. I did like it. It wasn't my favorite. I do have some personal issues with it, but it was a neat movie. It was very different. It is not your typical action movie. I don't even know if it really is an action movie at all. It is for like 20-25 minutes at the end of the film, and then it's really kind of not for the first. I mean,
it has
hour,
a 45-minute long action sequence.
Was it really 45 minutes? It felt like
it's insane. This movie's
that went on too long. I'm just gonna say it right off the bat. That went on way too long. I think it's great. It was great, but it was just so like overly indulgent, and it just, you know, everything looks the same. There weren't enough different elements to the ongoing fight scene in the town to keep me interested. I got bored during that part. That's my biggest problem with this film. I really loved everything before that. I loved the bodyguard basically, and then the samurai coming back into action to lead the assassins. I like their sort of like maneuvering around each other, you know, trying to catch each other out in different ways. I really liked that part of it. And then I liked the fighting, but it just got tiring, you know, which I know is kind of the intent, right? Is you are supposed to sort of feel the fatigue right along with the characters, but I just kind of found it a little bit too much, where I was like, all right, you know, can we get on with it? We kind of know where this is going. Let's just get there. It's been 30 minutes, you know. But you love this movie a lot more than I do, I think. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I think this movie is thematically really interesting. I think it's a fascinating commentary on Japanese culture and history, because of the time in which it takes place and the way in which the characters are interacting with the feudal system and what that represents. I think it has probably one of the best action sequences ever filmed, if I'm being honest. And it goes on forever, but the ambition to do something like that and the execution of that from a kind of pacing and martial arts perspective, I think is absolutely wonderful. I really like how it doesn't really rely on CGI very heavily and is, practical stunt work, practical sword fighting, practical effects. And I think it's incredibly memorable. I think if you see this movie, this is one of those films that just sticks with you forever. And I hadn't seen this film since probably it was around when it was released in subtitled in the English language. So it's been 15 years or so. And I still I remember really enjoying it at the time. And I think it in many ways is a good evolution on the Kurosawa samurai formula that had been developed over the past 50 years leading into this film. And in some ways, it kind of feels like the ultimate version of that. Miike is a really interesting director. He's really famous for another film called Ichi the Killer, which is shockingly violent. Like, it's about a contemporary Yakuza hitman. And it is brutal.
I haven't seen it, but I have heard. I've read about it. Yeah.
So you just have to understand what you're getting with Miike, and it's a balance of, I think, intelligent commentary, and it says a lot that he is a huge fan of the movie Starship Troopers and a huge fan of Paul Verhoeven. And he definitely is cut from that same cloth, where he uses extreme situations and extreme violence to be satire or black comedy a lot of the time, or to do social commentary. And, I think there are a lot of parallels. He's less funny than Verhoeven is. He's less goofy.
Yeah, I didn't find this movie goofy or funny, really. Gotta say,
I don't know. It has some funny moments to it. It definitely has some funny moments.
There was one moment I chuckled. We'll get to that, but
it definitely has some moments. And I can really easily just summarize this film for you guys, because, like we said, probably a good third of this movie is just one action sequence. Yeah. And it basically goes like this. So it takes place I'll explain the history in a little bit, but it takes place in 1844. And this is towards the end of the Tokugawa shogunate, which is very important because I will talk about how I think this is an interesting commentary on Japanese history and Japanese culture. And the time period is extremely relevant to that. So effectively, there is one guy named Naritsugu, who is the brother of the shogun, the current shogun, who is the military dictator of Japan, basically, in this feudal system. So the shogun is the ultimate power, not the emperor. That happens after the Meiji Restoration. And so what happens is he's the half-brother technically of the current shogun, the son of the former shogun. So he's very powerful. And the story is he is about to be put onto the shogun's advisory council. And this guy is a crazy masochist, psychopath killer who really doesn't care for his subjects and is a maniac. And so the other members of the aristocracy are appalled by this because he is wantonly murdering nobles, peasants,
he's like
whoever he feels
Japanese
like in the
super
moment.
Caligula, basically. He's he's crazy. Like, actually, like,
he's really crazy,
cartoonishly villainous in this.
Yeah. Which I do think serves a purpose for him to be kind of over the top. And so one of the other nobles recruits a samurai whose name is Shinzaemon, to assemble some other samurai, the titular 13 assassins, to ambush and kill this guy before he can be placed on the governing council of the shogun. And they just don't want him in power anymore. Partially, I think they want revenge. And this all plays out in kind of the conscription mode of Seven Samurai, into them setting up an ambush in this town to kill this guy, and the fight that lasts 45 minutes in this town where they do kill this guy.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
And almost all of them die. All but two of them die in the process.
Yep.
So it's a really straightforward plot. There are some elements such as the Naritsugu, the bad guy, the villain of this, has a underling named Hanbei, who is a fascinating character because he knows that Naritsugu is crazy and bad, but then he still feels the feudal obligation to his lord, and is entrenched in the Japanese honor society of following your lord, and so refuses to betray him, even though he may ethically disagree with everything that he's doing, which is not surprising because it's impossible to ethically agree with anything that Naritsugu
literally
does
watches his lord slaughter a family right in front of me with arrows for fun, and in front of him, and he's like clearly uncomfortable, but kind of just is like, well, this is just my lot in life, what can you do?
He's the Lord. He's in charge. And this is the part of the commentary on Japanese culture and history, right? And so eventually Hanbei is also killed by Shinzaemon. So there are some levels to this, but those are the broad strokes of the story of 13 Assassins. And how this really connects to Ghost of Yōtei is in the themes. So it's particularly what we assume are going to be the themes. Like, obviously the game's not out yet, but in Ghost of Tsushima, the themes are really applicable in that Jin Sakai, who is the main character of Ghost of Tsushima, is in a conflict where he is a samurai, but he is forced to do dishonorable actions like skulking around in the shadows and murdering people, because behaving like a ninja, as we would think about them in fiction, because there's an overwhelming enemy force of Mongols that he can't beat in a straight up confrontation, right? So you spend your game, the game, becoming the legendary ghost, who is the ethereal supernatural force that is killing the Mongols, right? And this culminates in this game with, basically it being disastrous that Jin betrays his samurai code, because then he becomes a target for the samurai because he is an apostate. And so it's about, maybe doing dishonorable things for honorable reasons, which is the same theme we have here, because it's samurai getting together to set a trap, fight dishonorably against an overwhelming force, and try and kill somebody in a station of power, which due to their oaths, they can't kill. And so is this honorable or not? And is this the right course of action, even through dishonor?
It's interesting because you've got sort of a conflict of, honor and duty, not only at that level, but also the level above the 13 Assassins, where you have the government official whose job it is to keep the peace. He's essentially like, it sounds like the lead, law enforcement officer for the kingdom, essentially. And so he's the one that originally recruits Shinzaemon to put a group together to assassinate this guy, because even though, this, law enforcer, does, serve the shogun, he also feels like he has a duty to the people to prevent this guy from getting on the council, because it would be disastrous for the, the greater good, basically. So you're kind of right away given this sort of thing where they get a little bit of a pass, right? Because they are acting dishonorably by being assassins, but they're also kind of following the orders of this person who's given them this task because it's going to save a lot of lives, right? And then we get sort of a montage of like how awful this guy is, right? Where he's like, they show someone who he cut off all their limbs and chopped out her tongue. He kills a family in front of us. He rapes a woman on her wedding. It's her wedding night, right? And then
It's
Or
like 2 weeks after they get
right,
married
right.
or
Oh yeah,
something
that's
like
right.
that.
He visits the estate, and then he does that, and then he kills her husband right in front of him, and like jokes about it during, like, I mean, this, we are, like I said, cartoonishly evil. We are given to, we are shown this person has sunk to the depths of depravity that is rarely seen, even in the worst of humanity. So we're all like, yeah, this guy needs to die. We're on board with the assassin plan, like, immediately in this movie.
And I think that's important, DoA,
Yeah.
because obviously a lot of the time for art needs some level of ambiguity, but the ambiguity in this film doesn't come from, is Naritsugu evil? Like, they have to make it abundantly clear that he is in fact the most evil.
They certainly do.
Because if he is not unambiguously evil, then the nuance of how the other characters behave around his evilness is what's lost, right? Because we have to think, if Hanbei had any kind of out, if there was some like shred of nobility in Naritsugu, then you might be like, well, Hanbei is just kind of doing his job. And is Naritsugu so bad? Which is not where we want the questions around the themes of this film to come up. What we want is Naritsugu must die. But because everybody knows that, what are the ethics of other people in an unambiguously black and white situation? And I think that's where the gray comes in, and that's where this film is very interesting.
Yeah, because they have to kind of talk other people into it and put this group together and then find a way to split off this lord from enough of his forces that killing him is even feasible, right? So that's kind of the first half of the movie, is that maneuvering I talked about earlier, right? Where it's basically Shinzaman versus Hanbei, kind of trying to position their forces in a way that reduces Hanbei and his guards to a level where they can theoretically fight them, which doesn't totally go to plan, but it's okay because we've got 45 minutes for 13 guys to kill like 200 people, which is not, we definitely push the realm of believability, and I think there's even some indication in this movie that there are supernatural forces at work too.
Oh,
this
course,
movie
yeah.
is, like, I would say, light fantasy in a way, in that some of the 13 warriors seem to have like supernatural skill and ability, and one of them is straight up just immortal, it seems like. So I guess at the end of the film that's just a thing, but it's kind of needed. And so that's where some of the conflict that I have with really enjoying this movie comes in, which is funny because I love fantasy films, but this movie doesn't really put itself out there as one at all until the end, right? You're kind of just led to believe throughout the entire movie that this is going to be very grounded in reality as far as combat goes and all that. The characters are all treating it like that, where like, oh, this is too many people, we can't beat them, blah, blah, blah. But then the fight starts and they just keep winning. It is like Starship Troopers, right? Except for, the bad guys, guards are the bugs, and you're kind of like, all right, you're shown they find ways to sort of trap different groups and take off like arguably bite-sized chunks, but there's still, no way at all. This seemed too far beyond the realm of possibility for 13 to take out 200 like that. Not in like we're going to stand in a pike line like the, Romans and poke people as they run at us, but like actually individually fighting every single person, basically.
So yes, and I do agree with you, DoA, and I think that's one of the flaws of this film. But the issue is that the version that we have available to us in the West is 15 minutes shorter than the original version in Japan.
Oh.
And the complaints you have are actually addressed in the real Japanese version. Now, I have never seen the real Japanese version of this film because, again, it is not available. But I do know from reading about the full-length version of this film that the character you are referring to, whose name is Koyata, who is the peasant, he's the hunter character that they encounter in the mountains. He's the 13th assassin. And he is brought in not as a samurai, but they find him kind of caught in a trap in the mountains. And he is the most like supernatural one. He's the one that, when you were saying at the end, he like resurrects, that's the one who gets stabbed in the neck and then just magically comes back at
across
the
the torso too, and then he just doesn't have the wounds at the end of the movie. He's like, all right, well, I guess I healed fast.
Which is funny because a bunch of the other samurai die.
Yeah.
A bunch of the other 13 assassins.
He's clearly
die,
like a
very obviously.
supernatural character,
Right. And so what's interesting is that there are scenes in the full-length version, the original version of this movie, that include strong suggestions that Koyata is a demon and that he is fighting on the side of good, but he himself is a supernatural creature. And so the previous scenes inform the fact that when he comes back, you're supposed to think, oh shit, this guy he's actually, mythological in origins. And you get that obviously in this film too, but it's like such a non sequitur and it just comes out of nowhere almost.
It's like, I was like, is this supposed to be like a funny thing? Is this supposed to be like a comedy moment? But it just doesn't land in the version that we see. And like, great. So there's, the full-on Japanese version is 15 minutes longer. Well, that doesn't help me. I can't watch that version. I have to judge this movie by the version that's available to me in the language I speak. So, I'm glad to know that, but I still think it's a big problem for this version.
Yeah, it's a shame that they've never, they've never like re-released this in its complete version for the English-speaking audience, which now that this film is more of a cult film or an art house film, I think would be very interesting because people would want to watch the full version these days and would be willing to do the research.
I would.
But I think the reason they released this edit initially is because that is some pretty deep references to Japanese mythology. And I think it would just fly right over the heads of most people when this was released in 2010 who are looking for a samurai action thriller. And because from what I understand, these scenes are like subtle nods to the fact that he's a demon. They may actually just make no sense for most people. You know what I mean? So they just cut that entirely because they thought the cultural knowledge to appreciate or even understand those scenes would probably be too great. That's my guess.
Maybe, but I feel like you can kind of, you can even like ADR or throw an extra line in there, right? You can do things that, make it work. So, and I think it's hard for me to imagine that any sort of attempt like that would have been worse than just having the guy miraculously live at the end after we saw him die and be like, what is going on in this movie now? Like, because again, we're not given any indication that there is anything supernatural going on in this film until it just sort of happens, until we see these 13 fight 200 and win, until we see this guy come back from having a sword through his neck. Right. And then you're just like, oh, is this, were we supposed to believe that it just kind of went through the side and grazed him? It didn't actually like hit anything vital. Like, is this a joke? Is he supernatural? I did take it to mean that he was some sort of like supernatural figure and that was just part of the movie. And I was like, did I miss something? But I didn't think I did. And so, yeah,
you did.
It seems like
it just wasn't in the
right.
movie.
Exactly. So I didn't miss anything. It's just something was there that was not shown to us in the version that's widely available here. So that's too bad. I think that would have, in my opinion, that would have helped the movie regardless of how they put it in,
Agreed. I'd love to see that version.
Me too.
Like I said, still haven't seen it.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it really is kind of like almost two different movies, right? It's half like drama and plotting and that kind of thing, subterfuge, and then it's half just straight up action movie, but and I think it's unique. You're right that it is a movie that'll stick with me, because it is so different from, pretty much anything else I've seen. I've never seen a movie that just totally kind of switched genres halfway through almost, and, it was good. It was a good movie, but I still think that it was just, the last part of it was just a little bit too long. It was a little bit too many scenes of the same thing, of like, a couple samurai fighting like 10 guys, and it's like the putties from Power Rangers, right? They're all dressed the same, the background is the same, the moves are the same. Like it to me, it started to feel like that, where it's like, okay, let's get to the real meat of this here, right? And no more putty fighting, to use the Power Rangers term.
Now, if you are a samurai traveling hard across the mountains of Japan, you might not smell so fresh. But you don't have to live like that anymore. It's not the 1800s. You, in fact, can use some Mando. Mando offers a variety of men's grooming products, including this delightful bourbon leather scented stick deodorant. But they also have cream tube deodorant, so you can rub it into your taint, or your feet, or your armpits, or wherever you might have some body odor. And my personal favorite, the deodorant wipes. If you need to freshen up after work, if you're going out that evening, it's a good way. If you don't have time for a shower, just to clean up, make sure you're completely body odor free before you hit that next activity. Also great if you're camping this fall and you need a way to feel a little bit cleaner while you're out there enjoying nature. So with that in mind, Mando's starter pack is, of course, perfect for new customers. It comes with one of those solid stick deodorants, cream tube deodorants, 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash or those aforementioned deodorant wipes. And it also comes with free shipping. As a special offer for listeners, new customers get 20% off site-wide with our exclusive code. Use code NERD, N-E-R-D, at shopmando.com for 20% off site-wide and free shipping. shopmando.com. Please support our show and tell them Nerd Legion sent you. Mando's got you covered. With deodorant plus sweat control, say goodbye to sweat stains and hello to long-lasting freshness.
So that's I felt like there was a little bit too much putty combat, right? It was a little bit too much. Let's fight a billion Ultrons, you know, like we saw in like Avengers 2 or something. I felt like it got to that territory for me. But aside from that, I really did like the movie.
I mean, I was not bored during the action sequences, especially because there's a very kind of limited amount of action previously in this movie. So I enjoy the change of pace. And I do think it's cut up pretty nicely with some more dialogue and character moments, you know, particularly in the kind of final duel at the end, the series of duels, you know, with
that's when it gets good again.
And Hanbei.
Yeah, that's when it gets good again. But let me ask you this first. Are you the type of person where if you get a fast food value meal, do you eat the entire burger and then eat all the fries at once, or do you go back and forth a little bit? Because if you like this film a lot,
I understand what you're saying.
I feel like you're the type of person that eats the entire burger and then is like, no, it is time for fries.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I don't do
all right. I was just curious.
That's psychopathic. That's something Naritsugu would do.
There you go. Only if you line up all the fries, you know, or just and then be like, now watch, and make them watch you eat the other fries one at a time. Yeah.
I do want to talk about the history and how this relates to Ghost of Yōtei, because one thing about Ghost of Yōtei is the game is set in 1603, which is the first year of the Tokugawa shogunate, and this is at the end of the Tokugawa shogunate in the 1840s, right? So we're basically dealing with a 250-year time difference, but a lot of the, you know, this period of relative peace in Japan is notable, and I think it informs, you know, our experience of probably playing Ghost of Yōtei, as well as watching this movie. And why I said earlier, it's so important that we look at the end of this period is because this is immediately before, you know, it's 20 years, as we learn at the end of the film, before the Tokugawa shogunate basically falls apart entirely. It is then, there's a period of time called the Meiji Restoration, where Emperor Meiji is restored to the throne and put in a position of power again, as opposed to the military ruler who was the shogun. And the reason behind this was basically because the West forced their way into Japan, and the Japanese realized that they were going to get completely dominated if they stayed in this feudal system, and that they had to open up and play ball with the West and modernize. And so they had to do away with the feudal clans and the caste system that they had and everything like that to move towards a more modern society. And that was very effective for them. They modernized very quickly, especially in East Asia, compared to everybody else, and they became the dominant power in East Asia by the 20th century. So, you know, worked real well.
I think it's a fascinating period of history for sure, because and a lot of the media that's set in that time period is really interesting. You know, like you know, Rurouni Kenshin, the anime is during that time period, and then to a certain extent, you know, Tom Cruise's The Last Samurai is kind of towards the end of that. You know. And which by the way, I think is a good movie. And no, Tom Cruise is not the last samurai. The title does not refer to
That's
him.
Ken Watanabe.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Tom Cruise's character is kind of there to like witness all this stuff.
It's a great movie, though.
It is a great movie. But anyway, I think that is a very fascinating period in history because you have this, crazy clash of past and future. It's almost like it's like a medieval universe versus a science fiction universe almost, when you look at the clash of technology, right? And then comes the clash of ideologies. It's so interesting. So I do tend to really like stuff that's set kind of during that time period. So that's points in its favor.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about this is the critique on the samurai code as being almost, antiquated, not applicable to the world in which the people are living right now, especially a world of peace. And this is referenced throughout this film where they say, like, well, many of the samurai we're going to be fighting literally have no fighting experience. And that sounds weird because they are quite literally a warrior class who is paid by their lords to be warriors, but the country has basically been at peace for 250 years. So who knows how good these guys actually are in combat. And 20 years later, there would be no samurai anymore because the daimyos, the feudal lords, became the governors of the prefectures of Japan. So the clan holdings became the prefectures, and then the daimyos became the governors because they were just kind of slid over into those positions. But the samurai class was entirely abolished, and their income came from the daimyos. So what this did was it made a bunch of people who had spent their entire lives training to be warriors with no war to fight and nothing to do and no money. So it wasn't great, wasn't great. But this is a pretty big contrast to the pre-Tokugawa shogunate, which was the Sengoku, which was the Warring States period, when it was just constant clan conflict, constant battle, constant need for these samurai to be employed by the daimyos. Competition to take over Kyoto and become shogun, right? And by this time period, it's like, okay, so we have this samurai code that may have served well in the past, but the practical application right now is that we have, it could theoretically enable the worst kind of person and then demand loyalty to them and then punish, because of your code of honor, any attempt to do anything about this horrible person. And I think it's a pretty strong indictment of that culture and that period of time in Japanese history.
Yeah, I mean, imagine like a group that supported a horrible person just because they felt like they needed to, I can't imagine something like that. How stupid would that be, right? But anyway, go back to 13 Assassins. Yeah, I think it is interesting when you get to that point where culture does need, to change, whether by philosophical necessity or, functional necessity, and there's that scene where Shinzaman, he finds out about the plot, right, where they ask him to organize the 13 Assassins, and he's like, I'm shaking because I'm just so excited I can fight people again, so it's because he's one of the few people that has, had combat experience and all that, so on the one hand,
he's old.
Yeah, exactly. So on the one hand, he sees it as a noble cause, which it is, but on the other hand, he also is just excited to get back in the game, so to speak, And that leads to just a really interesting fight between him and Hanbei at the end of the film. Before he fights the bad guy, he also fights his former, class buddy, basically. They went to samurai school together, essentially.
Friend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, which plays a big part in the ending of that fight, and so it also is kind of that practical versus practiced skill, right? Where, our Shinzaman ends up winning the fight because he employs what, could be seen as some dirty tricks, but hey, he's taking advantage of the fact that his classmate Hanbei doesn't really have that, real world experience like he does and doesn't know what it's like to fight a real fight, So
and also he knows, I mean, it's intelligent because he knows that Hanbei, even if he disagrees with the actions of Naritsugu, is still operating on the honor-bound system. So he will not do the underhanded fighting trick, just as he will not betray Naritsugu, even though he knows at some level that Naritsugu is evil, right? So I think that's a great visual moment that culminates in the value systems being challenged.
Yeah.
And the capacity to do the wrong thing for the right reason.
Well, when
which is
go ahead.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, well, it all then of course Hanbei loses to Shinzaman, he cuts his head off, and then Naruto kicks poor Hanbei's head, and Shinzaman is like genuinely distraught. He was like, "Why would you do this? This guy literally just died for you in front of you," and so it's also kind of, that's where it gets like the most Paul Verhoeven, I feel like, where Hanbei literally fulfills his oath and dies for his lord, and then his lord just boots his head like a soccer ball, and there is sort of a, it's a horrible moment, but there is sort of like a grim, satirical comedy to it too, which I think is intentional.
Yeah. And also I think is again reinforces Naritsugu's lack of value of human life.
Yeah.
And
he
in
doesn't
fact, he
care
says,
about any sort
you
of
can
code.
kick, he says, you can kick my head after you kill me. So he doesn't even really care about his own life. Like I mean, what's scary about Naritsugu is his level of nihilism, right? And the fact that even though he is the one ostensibly in this societal structure who should be the shining light, the shining light, the pillar of honor, of duty, is in fact a complete nihilist who has no values.
Yeah.
And in fact, and also is extremely destructive himself. So I really like what this film does, and I really like the commentary that it provides, and I just find it very enjoyable. I think it's easy to fixate on the blood and the 45-minute action scene because that's the end and that's what we're left with. But I think there's a lot of thematic subtlety and character nuance in the first hour and 20 minutes of this movie that is great. And it does carry through to the end. And ultimately, like, that stays with me just as much as the crazy fight sequence.
Yeah. I mean, I my only complaint with it was that I just got a little bit bored during the huge, long 45-minute fight sequence. It just got a little bit samey to me, some of the scenes and shots and all that. So if I could, this is like sacrilegious to the people that love this, I suppose, but I would love to go back and like edit that fight down by about half. And
I'd get rid of the CGI on fire bulls personally.
Yes,
completely
exactly.
Tacky and irrelevant.
That was another part of it where I was like, oh, come on.
It's a really cool idea. It just was executed very badly, especially compared to the rest of the fight sequence.
Again, it's another thing that comes out of nowhere. They don't talk about planning this at all. It's just like there's suddenly bulls on fire running people down, and you're like, okay, I guess this is happening now. So yeah, I think it's a great film for a lot of reasons. It just loses a lot of steam during that extended fight scene, to the point that it holds it a little bit back for me, So I'd still watch it again sometime, probably, it certainly will stay with me again, like you mentioned earlier, but for its uniqueness. But yeah, just fight scene was a little bit too long.
So I do think, though, that this fight sequence, it just inarguably is the inspiration behind the combat that we see in the Ghost series, because the combat is one of the strongest parts of Ghost of Tsushima, right? The changes in stances, the different kinds of enemies with different weapons that you end up fighting, and the idea that you're fighting 5-10 Mongols at once. And in the thick of a melee one against many, is one of the core fantasies and one of the things that is best about Ghost of Tsushima, and is going to be replicated in Ghost of Yōtei, although with more weapons this time instead of stances, it would appear. And this feeling, I think, is really, really well captured in Ghost of Tsushima, and it really never gets boring in Ghost of Tsushima either. The combat of Ghost of Tsushima is one of the best in any game I have ever played, and they ripped it off directly from this fight sequence in 13 Assassins.
Well, I mean, and the reason why it works in a game like that is because you get to do it. When you're watching a movie, you just have to sit and watch it. It's a lot more fun to participate in the action than to just sit and watch it if it goes on for that long. So yeah, it works in a video game,
right? And that's where the inspiration comes from. They look at this and they say, "Wow, that was cool, but wouldn't it be cooler if you could?"
The answer is yes. Right? The answer is definitely yes. There, it would be cooler, and I'm sure it will be. But yeah, I overall I liked it. I think it was definitely. Again, it's easy to say that 13 Assassins was, far and away better than the majority of things we've watched on Nerd Legion. And I know we're watching a lot of good things by design for this series, which is refreshing. But, you know, again, yeah, my complaints with 13 Assassins are, you know, feel like nitpicks compared to the complaints I have with, you know, Spock Amok, right?
I just love Doa how you're like, well, you know, I am going to kind of defend, you know, this Superman movie, but you're like 13 Assassins. That fight sequence was too long.
Was.
I'm like, Doa.
Well, I wasn't. Well, first of all,
It's a really good movie.
first of all, I never defended
really
the Zack
good
Snyder Superman movie, which also had a fight scene that went on way too long.
That's true.
That version was not good. The James Gunn one was actually very sparing on action, I felt like, overall. But anyway.
No, I'm not saying you had the same complaint. I'm just saying that your defenses of what I would consider significantly worse.
Well, sure. I think it's all graded on a scale, though, too. You know, I mean, if something is better, you're going to be looking for more nitpicky things.
Sir?
You know, hey, if you know, here's the thing: if I'm a teacher and like the dumb student comes to me and needs just a lot of corrections on basic things, I'm going to do that. But I'm also going to be positive and be like, hey, you're doing really good in this area. Keep it up. You know, I see you making improvement. Let's keep working on that. And if the hyper smart student comes to me and they're doing really great overall, but the little mistakes, I'm going to focus on the little mistakes, right? You have to take the competence of the student into, I think, into accounting when you're looking at these things.
So what's your rating for 13 Assassins?
I'd probably put it like an 8 out of 10 for me.
Me too.
Yeah, I think it's really, really strong. I think it's a great movie. I just think it drags quite a bit for me in that big fight scene act.
Yeah, I think it could be better if we actually had the scenes that are included in the Japanese
That would certainly help too. Yeah, that still kind of baffles my mind that they wouldn't just try to find a way to make that work when it explains so much weird stuff that happens at the end.
I'm just surprised they haven't released the full cut in an easily available way in the English language. Like you can.
I didn't even know there was a different
if you hunt
version.
around, you can get some like, you know, fan subbed versions of it, but it's not readily available. It's not out there to purchase in physical or digital ways for you to watch in a English language subtitled environment.
Well, you know, as a commentator, you got to call it how you see it, and this is the only version I can see, so gotta call it as such.
Sure.
Sorry, Takashi Miike.
Yeah, it does and make the movie ending really weird, and it just leaves you with a bunch of dumb questions that you shouldn't have.
True. By the way, it is funny how many times I hear his name pronounced Takashi Miike, which, I mean, it sure looks like that if you ignore the extra I, but hey. Who am I to talk about name pronunciation errors, right? Have you seen my career?
I mean, it's just the esports way.
Yeah.
Because the players troll us and they say, this is how you should pronounce my name. And then they tell somebody else to pronounce it a different way. And then you look dumb.
I literally made a Twitter video once of a player. I was like, okay, for the last time, how do you pronounce your ID? And he said it. And we recorded the video and we put it out on Twitter that like 5 minutes later. The very next day, this is what Monty's referring to. He showed up and in an interview after his game, he said his name was pronounced in a different way. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? You know, this is not on me anymore. This is on you.
The trolling is real. But yeah, if you like this movie, I think its parallels are very clear to the Ghost series. I think that it's a really good modern take on these samurai epics, especially because we're looking at a bunch from like, you know, the 50s and up to the 70s, two from the 70s, and then Throne of Blood. And most of Kurosawa's famous samurai works outside of Ran were done in the like 50s, 60s era. So, yeah, it's definitely a fun film if you haven't seen it, and certainly worth watching. We are going to be moving next into Lady Snowblood from 1973, which, if you are a Kill Bill fan, you will realize that this movie is just Kill Bill, but released 40 years earlier.
Way better. Spoiler.
It was definitely a huge inspiration for Tarantino, and is obviously a very big inspiration for Ghost of Yōtei, particularly with the female vengeance narrative that we will be treated to in the video game when it releases in just about a month. So we will see you next week for Lady Snowblood.